That was Marcus Fiesel. What's left of Marcus Fiesel would fit in this cup.
Filicide is the deliberate act of a parent killing their own child. Instances in which parents kill their children may seem so horrifying and tragic that they defy explanation. Meanwhile, published scientific and medical research doesn't offer much epidemiological context to help people understand patterns among such heinous crimes. 54.7% of killers are fathers, while 42.6% are mothers. This means that a mother is just as likely to kill a child as a father. Although killing a child seems difficult to fathom, it happens more than many of us can imagine. The horrific story I'm about to share with you is about a boy named Marcus Fiesel, who was an autistic 3-year-old foster child who lived and died in Ohio. His body was burnt and thrown into the Ohio River like garbage. He was murdered by Liz and David Carroll, the foster parents who were supposed to love this child as their own. Instead of protecting this infant, they considered him a burden. But why not return the child to the foster child agency instead of murdering him? This narrative is Marcus Fiesel. The human child is the most helpless form of life. Many insects and animals are born with an early ability to survive without parental guidance, but a human baby solely depends on an adult for love, care, and protection. Unfortunately, children become victims of their own environment. Marcus Fiesel is one of those children who will never get the opportunity to love, marry, have friends, or even have his own children. Marcus Fiesel was born on June 24, 2003 and grew up in Middletown, Ohio with his mother, Donna Trevino, and 2 siblings, Michael and Peaches. Marcus was described as an awesome little guy who enjoyed flowers, Bob the Builder, and bubbles. Marcus was an autistic kid and attended the school for special needs children. He was a very active child who loved to play all the time, which his mother found hard to cope with, and a neighbour said there were many times she saw Donna weeping with exhaustion. I don't have kids, but I know people who have children will do anything for them. They feed them, clothe them, and teach them the necessary skills to become successful adults. I think the best parents are the ones who teach their children how to survive without them. Donna Trevino was not equipped to be a mother. Not only did she have 3 children she couldn't care for, but she was also a victim of domestic violence. Multiple calls were made to the police regarding domestic violence at the hands of her boyfriend. Police had been called to the home on several occasions due to domestic violence Donna suffered at the hands of her boyfriend. While visiting the home, police noticed a flea infestation as well as a strong odour of feces. On a visit in September 29, 2005, police noticed that Marcus had a huge bruise on his bottom. Marcus's father inflicted the bruising. It was discovered that Child Protective Services have been investigating the family due to complaints filed about abuse in the home. Marcus was not well cared for at his home. Numerous incidents demonstrated that he and his siblings were not closely monitored or cared for. On April 22, 2006, Marcus was found wandering the streets and was almost hit by a car. 4 months later, he crawled out of his second-story window and fell off the roof, resulting in a cut to his chin that required stitches. There were feces on the carpet, and the house was infested with fleas. In April of 2006, Donna told people she didn't think she could take care of her children anymore, and she turned them over to Child Welfare, who contacted Lifeway for Youth, an agency that served Butler County, Ohio. It is reported that Donna went to court to get 2 of her children, but she didn't want Marcus back. She terminated her rights to him. Let that sink in. At the ripe age of 3 years old, Marcus was unwanted by his biological mother. What could he have done in such a short amount of time to be so unwanted? During the summer of 2006, Liz and Carroll lived as a family in Valleywood Drive in Clermont County, Ohio. Also living in the home was Amy Baker, who was David Carroll's girlfriend. Amy Baker also stayed at other residences during this time period. It is worth noting that the Carrolls were licensed foster parents by Lifeway for Youth, and it was their sole source of income. Neither Liz or David were employed. The Carrolls had 2 foster children in the summer of 2006. One of these children was Marcus Fiesel. Lifeway for Youth informed the Carrolls that Marcus was a difficult child and should never be left alone. They also told the Carrolls that Marcus had developmental deficiencies and needed constant supervision. Lifeway for Youth also informed the Carrolls that should they need someone to look after Marcus, Westford Care was a facility they could use anytime. Despite this, the Carrolls willingly accepted Marcus's placement on May 5, 2006. It didn't take the Carrolls long to realise that Marcus was more difficult to cope with than they had expected. Lifeway caseworkers visited each foster child placement once a week, and on August 3, 2006, a Lifeway caseworker visited the Carrolls and Marcus Fiesel. An investigation into Lifeway for Youth found the agency wasn't entirely truthful about their foster care training process and how often they checked on the children. It's difficult to process how this child was placed under the care of the Carrolls. In their own words, the Carrolls described themselves as having been mentally unstable, criminal, and completely immoral long before the state decided they would be fit foster parents for a helpless child. Butler County would unknowingly place this boy in a house of horrors. When Lifeway for Youth placed Marcus with the Carrolls, they didn't know David had mental health issues or that woman, Amy Baker, who is said to be the Carrolls' live-in girlfriend, lived in their home. It was later discovered that the Carrolls and Amy had some type of unusual sexual relation. Both Liz Carroll and David Carroll had sexual relations with Amy. Having known about David's mental health issues and this sexual arrangement should have disqualified them from being caretakers of Marcus. This oversight turned out to be a fatal mistake for Marcus Fiesel. David was arrested in 2006 for domestic violence, and he did not report that to Lifeway for Youth, something that would have been required. At one point, David left the home because he was jealous of the attention that Marcus was getting from Amy and Liz. He wasn't sure if he wanted to remain a foster parent. While David moved out of Valleywood Drive with Amy, he returned a short while later. On August 15, 2006, Liz Carroll collapsed from an apparent heart condition at a park in Hamilton County. When medics responded, she told them she brought 4 children to the park, but when she regained consciousness, only 3 were present. The 4 children she mentioned were a child that she had with David, another foster child, a toddler she was babysitting, and Marcus Fiesel. Liz said, quote, "I was at the park with him and 3 other kids, playing on swings and slides, and have low blood pressure issues, collapsed. Somehow, sometimes. Marcus wandered off or was taken. I believe someone did take him, hopefully with good intentions." Unquote. A week later, Liz Carroll was in tears when she held a news conference in the park and pleaded in front of TV cameras to find her son.
I'm asking that anybody that saw me with my kids, or saw me, or saw Marcus, to please contact the authorities.
She said she thought somebody had taken him. She said, quote, "I need help from the public to help my son. Marcus is my son. I know people think foster care is temporary, but please return him to hospital. Waking up every morning and not having him run to me is very difficult. I am closer than his birth mother to him." Unquote. There were suspicions around Liz's story. No one saw Marcus at the park on August 15th. The police and the public had many doubts about Liz Carroll's story. After Liz's plea, several people volunteered to help and search the park surrounding the neighbourhood for several days. The whole town was turned upside down looking for this little kid. After a long search with no trace of Marcus, police and the public grew suspicious of the Carrolls as incidents like these are common. One such incident is Susan Smith. She drowned her children in a car and then pleaded for their safe return on TV. Liz kept her story intact. She swore they never hurt Marcus, but officials suspected her and David in Marcus's disappearance. Even after David failed a lie detector test, she kept her story. To the world, Liz was a mother crying for her children. But in reality, behind the cameras and public, Liz, David, and Amy knew that Marcus was dead inside their house. Under intense scrutiny and persistence, the police would crack the case and learn the truth about what really happened to Marcus. On Friday, August 4th, 2006, Liz, David, and Amy drove off to the family reunion in Williamstown, Kentucky. They took their own children, their dog, but left Marcus in the closet, bound with a blanket and packing tape, leaving only his feet and head outside the blanket. He was deprived of food and water. Police said that Liz and David Carroll had left Marcus locked in a second-floor closet, bound with a blanket and packing tape, while they attended a family reunion in Kentucky on August 2006. This was confirmed by Liz Carroll in a testimony before a grand jury on August 28, 2006. She claimed, quote, "I didn't have any intentions of hurting him," unquote. So think about this statement. She didn't mean to hurt him. How evil is that? She left a 3-year-old boy in a closet, but willingly took the family dog. The dog received food and water and returned home safely with the family. It's disturbing to think that a dog received more humane treatment than a 3-year-old boy. How did 3 adults agree to leave Marcus at home by himself like this? If they couldn't bring him to Kentucky, why didn't they use Westford Care? This would have provided Marcus with a caregiver while the family went to Kentucky. As Liz Carroll got into the car, she advised David and Amy that Marcus was freaking out. Even at the tender age of 3, he knew something was wrong. He knew he was going to die. Imagine the terror in his final moments of life. A helpless 3-year-old with no food or water trapped in a sweltering closet. The Carrolls arrived at their reunion on Friday evening, and according to relatives, they were having a good time. In the early morning hours on Sunday, David Carroll began to feel bad about Marcus and insisted they go home. They got home at 6 a.m. to find Marcus was in the closet dead. Police said the heat reached between 105 and 110 degrees in the closet, and he died from the heat and not the lack of water or food. It would have been a slow and painful death. The 2 people that were entrusted to help him killed him. Amy Baker advised the Carrolls to call 911. However, the Carrolls chose to get rid of the body and conceal Marcus's death. Amy Baker said that she had helped David bring Marcus's body to a chimney which was located on 88 acres of land where they used several gallons of gas to ignite his tiny body and tried to cremate his remains. They burnt him over and over again. What was left of Marcus was put into a pillowcase and thrown into the Ohio River. David and Amy thought they had removed all of what remained of Marcus from the chimney, but they were wrong. Marcus Fiesel's incinerated remains were discovered on an 88-acre estate owned by Michael Carrolls in Brown County, Ohio. Ultimately, the couple faced charges in both Claremont and Hamilton counties. Amy received immunity in Ohio in exchange for her testimony. Amy confessed to helping to dispose of Marcus's body in the Ohio River. She wouldn't serve any time in prison for her role in the homicide. In their statements, the Carrolls blamed Amy Baker. David said it was Amy who put Marcus in the closet. Amy had moved into the Carrolls' home along with their 3 children a few months after David, who had previously left his wife to live with Amy, to return home. Liz Carroll said she agreed to the arrangement because she felt sorry for Amy's children. Amy, who claimed the Carrolls put Marcus in the closet, received immunity from prosecution for her testimony against the Carrolls. On August 28, 2006, Liz Carroll and David Carroll are called in before a Hamilton County grand jury. Liz and David Carroll are each indicted on 1 count of involuntary manslaughter and 2 counts of child endangering. David Carroll also faced 1 charge of gross abuse of a corpse. They are arrested and jailed. Investigators search in Brown County for the boys' remains. On August 29, 2006, additional Hamilton indictments were made against the Carrolls. Both David and Liz were charged on 1 count of making false alarms and on 1 count of inducing panic. Furthermore, Liz was charged with 2 additional charges of perjury. Here's audio from Amy Baker's testimony. In these clips, Amy testifies about how she lost custody of her children because of her financial circumstances and for her role in Marcus Fiesel's death. She also testifies about how she met the Carrolls and a relationship with them.
Raise your right hand, please. You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Your next witness, Mr. Breyer.
Amy Baker.
This witness has been previously sworn in under oath. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you state your name, please?
Amy Baker.
I want to move that microphone up just a little bit to you, Mr. Baker.
Slide your chair in there, Ms. Baker. When's your date of birth, ma'am?
6/2/81.
All right, you need to speak a little bit louder.
6/2/81.
And where were you born?
Georgetown, Ohio.
Can you tell us your father's name
Robert Ramsey.
and your mother's name?
Teresa Chapman.
Are your parents married still?
No.
And could you tell us when they were divorced?
Around 1987.
You were around 6 years old at the time?
Yes.
How far did you go in school, Amy?
I completed my 9th grade year. I went to the middle of my 10th grade.
Since you completed, and where did you go to high school?
A combination with Amelia and Felicity.
And since you completed the 9th grade there and halfway through the 10th grade, have you made any attempts to obtain a GED?
Yes.
And have you been successful in that?
No.
Do you have any sisters?
Yes, 4.
And what are their first names?
Tina, Bobby, Tanya, and Jackie.
And I want, do they all have children?
Yes.
And I want to specifically refer to Tanya and Jackie. And taking Tanya first, does Tanya have children?
Yes.
How many?
2.
And what is the youngest child's first name?
Kelly.
And how old is Kelly today?
She's 1.5.
And Jackie, does she have children?
Yes.
How many?
2.
And what are their ages?
Finley is 6 and Keegan is 1.
Do you have children, ma'am?
Yes.
And what are their names and ages?
Taylor, Brian, and Courtney. Taylor is 7.5. Courtney is 4, and Brian is 6.
Are you married?
Yes.
And your husband's name?
Brian Baker.
When were you married?
April 12th of 01.
And you are still married today?
Yes.
Have you been separated?
Yes.
For approximately how long?
3.5 years.
Have there been times during that 3.5 years where there were attempts to reconcile with your husband?
Yes.
Did you in fact move back in with your husband on a number of times during the past 4 years?
Twice.
But as of today, you are still married to him?
Yes.
Are your 3 children, is he the biological father of your 3 children?
Yes.
Do you currently have physical control, custody of your children?
No.
Who does?
Children's Services.
And can you tell us when they were taken from you?
The 29th of August.
Of last year, 2006?
Yes.
And could you tell us why?
Because I was, they said I was homeless and jobless, and I subject my kids to domestic violence, and I knew about the disappearance of Marcus.
Now, when you say subjected them to domestic violence, where did that alleged domestic violence take place?
At Dave and Liz's house.
Did it involve you?
No. Thank you.
How often do you see your children?
If it's not holidays, every Monday.
Once a week?
Yes.
Are you working on what is called a reunification plan?
Yes.
Are you currently working?
I was suspended from my job
And why was that?
because of this case.
Okay, and why did...
Objection, Your Honor.
Well, I'll sustain that at this point.
Now, your husband, Brian Baker, where did you meet him?
Through a couple of friends, and then I seen him at Holly Lanes.
Holly Lanes up outside Amelia?
Yes.
And did you get to know him at Holly Lanes?
Yeah.
And did you, for lack of a better word, fall in love with him out of those experiences at Holly Lanes?
Yes.
And then ultimately had the 3 children?
Yes.
While you were married and living together, was Brian a willing provider for you and your children?
Yes.
Well, overruled at this point.
Did you work during the time that the 2 of you were together?
I never kept a job. No, I didn't have to.
Were there times when the two of you fell on your face financially?
Yes.
And what did you do?
We went back to my mom's.
Did you and your children and your husband all move back in with your mom?
Yes.
And you say you were separated in when?
2003.
Now, when did you first meet Liz and David Carroll?
2005 when they started babysitting my kids.
All right, now you need to keep your voice up so these people can hear you.
In 2005.
You know when in 2005?
I'm guessing March. I'm not 100% sure.
So sometime in the first quarter or so of 2005?
Yes.
And how did that come about? I mean, did you find them in the newspaper? How did you determine that was you say to babysit your children? How did that come about?
The child care people at the Claremont County gave me her name because my daughter went to Merwin and I wanted to keep her in Merwin School District.
Were you looking for child care?
Yes.
Could you afford to pay for child care completely on your own?
No.
Is that why you went to the Department of Jobs and Family Services?
Yes.
Were you seeking some help with your child care expenses?
Yes.
What were you attempting to do at that time that you needed child care?
Get my GED.
And how many times a week was it necessary for you to employ child care so that you could do that?
2 times a week, 3 hours a day.
Now, you say your daughter, Taylor,
Yes.
was in Merwin Elementary.
Yes.
Did you tell them, the people at Jobs and Family Services, that you had what you were looking for with regard to the location of the child care that you were seeking?
Yes.
And what was that?
That I wanted her to be in, I wanted to find someone in Merwin School District so I didn't have to change my daughter's schools.
Okay, so you wanted child care somewhere in the area where she was going to school.
Yes.
And what did they tell you in that regard?
They gave me Liz's name.
They gave you Liz's name.
Mm-hmm.
Can I interrupt for a moment, please? I have been advised by my technicians that there is someone with a cell phone on who is causing feedback in the recording system. People, it's not whether you have your phone turned down or whether you have it on vibrate, it's whether or not it's on. So if you have any cell phones on, please turn them off. The system will pick that up if you have your cell phone on and someone's trying to contact you. Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Breyer, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Were you notified or informed, or was there any representations made to you that the Carrolls were in fact, at least Liz Carroll was in fact a certified daycare provider?
Yes.
Did you go meet with Liz Carroll at that time?
Yes.
And where was she living?
At 3822 Bennett Road.
Is that here in Claremont County?
Yes.
And what did you find when you went to meet Liz?
A happy home.
Happy home?
Mm-hmm.
Did it seem as though that would be a place where your children would be safe and secure while you were out doing what you needed to do?
Yes.
Had you ever met Liz Carroll before?
No.
So that spring of 2005 was the first time you had ever seen her?
Yes.
Now, in those early days or weeks of, did you in fact employ Liz to provide daycare for your children?
Yes.
Now, how does that work? I mean, do you pay Liz? Obviously, you're getting some help. But, how does that work?
I just have a co-payment. The county pays her, gives her a voucher or a check or something.
All right. So, do you bill the county, or does she bill the county, or do you know?
She bills the county.
All right. So, if she provides daycare for your children, she bills the county, and there's some sort of co-payment that she's entitled to from you yourself.
Right.
Who determines what that co-payment is?
The county.
And how do they determine that?
Based on how much money I make or I was making at that time.
All right. Now, what was your co-payment when you began your involvement with that daycare in the spring of 2005?
$2.
$2 how often?
Every month.
So for $2 a month, she would provide daycare for your children.
Right.
And then the county would pay her whatever that was worth, other than your $2.
Yes.
And did you in fact employ Liz to watch your children?
Yes.
With regard to David Carroll, when's the first time you noticed either him or a picture of him or anything to indicate he lived there in the home?
The first time I went there, I recognized I knew him from somewhere in a family photo, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't know where.
Okay, so you saw a family photo at Liz's house, he was in it, and you had some vague recollection that you knew him from some previous experience.
Yes.
Ultimately, did you figure out who he was?
Yes.
And tell these people how that happened.
Me and my sister went there to either pick up my kids or drop them off.
And could you tell me which sister that was?
Tanya.
All right. So you and
And-
Tanya go to the Carroll house. All right. Go ahead.
And I think that she says something about knowing him, or he says something about.
Well, this is not being received for the truth of the content, but only to explain the subsequent actions of this witness, and for another purpose, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank-
801.
Thank you, Your Honor. Go ahead.
Either she, Tanya, or Dave, they recognized each other, and he'd said from Holly Lanes, and then that's how I remembered him, from being from Holly Lanes when I was like 15 or 16. I knew him as Dave C. I didn't know him as Dave Carroll. I just knew him as Dave C.
Did he work up there at Holly Lanes?
No.
Did he hang around up there at Holly Lanes?
Yes.
And he was known at Holly Lanes as Dave C.
Yes.
And you recognized him after he and Tanya talked that that's who that person in the picture was.
Yes.
Now, did there come a time when he began to be around that home there on Bennett Road more so than he had been?
Yes.
And what was that? Why was that?
He didn't work anymore, so he was there every time I dropped off my kids and picked them up.
Were you leaving all three of your children there?
Yes.
And how many days a week did it start?
2 days.
And did it expand to be more than 2 days?
Yes.
And what did it go to?
Up to like 4 to 6 days. Because I took a job and I didn't work every day at the cleaners because I had to take off either Tuesday or Thursday because I still try to get my GED, but I had to work one of those days. So she would have a short day on either Tuesday or Thursday where I would only go to get my GED, and the other days I would go to work.
Okay.
I would drop them off at 5:30 and pick them up around 4:30 or 5.
So 5:30 in the morning you would drop them off
Yes.
and pick them up at 4 or 5 in the afternoon.
Yes.
Now you say the cleaners during this time there while the children were being watched on Bennett Road, where did you work?
At the Appearance Plus cleaners.
All right, and any place else?
I had a second job at Country Inn as a waitress, but she didn't watch my kids for that.
Okay, so she was just watching your kids while you were at GED and Appearance Plus cleaners.
Yes.
Did you subsequently take a job somewhere else?
Yes.
And where was that?
At Salem Woods Nursing Home.
All right, and did there come a time when your $2 per month copay changed?
Yes.
And tell them about that, please.
It changed from $2 to $183 a
Per month?
Yes.
So it went up $185
It
per
went
month?
up- Went up $181 a month.
Per month.
Yes.
And why was that?
Because I believe that they cannot change your copay for 6 months regardless.
Well, I'm going to overrule as to her understanding it'll be received for that purpose only at this point.
I understand that that every 6 months they can only change your copay every 6 months, even if you get a better job with more money. So they changed my copay.
So approximately 6 months later,
Yeah.
they changed your copay?
And at that time I was working at Salem Woods, which made my copay $183.
Okay, so they reevaluated your needs
Yeah.
and then changed the copay.
Right.
Now, did you ultimately work out some form of deal with Liz regarding that copay?
Yes.
And what was that?
That if someone else watches my kids 1 or 2 days a week, I didn't have to pay a copay.
And by someone else watching your kids, who did you meet?
My mom or my sisters.
Okay, and what would Liz do then?
I would just sign them in and out when they wasn't there, and then she would just turn it in so she could.
Approach. Rephrase your question.
Yes, sir. Did Liz tell you what she would do in lieu of your copay?
Yes,
And what did she tell you?
that she wouldn't have me pay a copay if someone else watched my kids for me 1 or 2 days out of the month or once a week, to where it would equal up to where the copay was being paid for, basically.
And did she tell you she would go ahead and bill
Yes,
for those days even though she was not watching?
yes,
And you, in fact, signed sheets indicating your kids were there when they were not there.
right,
And you knew that was wrong.
yes.
Did this, during this time period throughout 2005, was this pretty much a legitimate babysitting relationship?
Right.
Did you believe Liz was a daycare provider?
Yes.
Did the two of you get along well?
Yes.
Did you and Liz become friends?
Yes.
Was David around the house a lot at the end?
Yes.
Did you consider him to be a friend?
Yes.
Now, do you recall, did you know where Dave was working when you first began to take your kids there?
Yeah, I remember he was on a business trip whenever I first met Liz, and she had told me that he was in Las Vegas for Rent-A-Center,
Okay.
some kind of a convention or something.
And did he come to tell you, information
thing.
that
He told me
made
the
it
same
obvious
thing.
he was working at Rent-A-Center?
Yeah.
And do you recall, if you do, how long after you began to have your children babysat there that he terminated that job?
Within a couple weeks. I'm not 100% sure how long it was.
And did he begin to be around the house there on Bennett Road much more frequently after that employment relationship ended?
Yes.
Did there come a time that the Carrolls began to provide certified daycare, and I assume it would have been Liz Carroll, began to provide certified daycare for your sister's children?
Yes.
Which children?
Kelly, Keegan, and Finley.
So that would be Keegan and Finley, who were Jackie's children,
Right.
and you indicated they were 1 and 6. They're 1 and 6 now,
Right.
so they were fairly young at that time.
Yeah, 5 and 8 months or something.
And Kelly, who is now 1 and a half, so would have been just under 1 at the time.
Right.
Now, directing your attention to the time period on Bennett Road. And I will, if I were to tell you, well, strike that. The time period on Bennett Road, did Dave begin to make comments to you which were, for lack of a better word, ambiguous? Do you understand what I mean by that?
Approach. Ladies and gentlemen, the answer to this question is not to be received as to whether it's true or not, but only to explain the subsequent actions of this witness, and for no other purpose under 801. You may proceed.
Did Dave begin to make comments to you which, in a sense, ambiguously, were suggestive?
Yes.
And could you give us examples of the type of comments you're talking about?
Do you want to stay all night? Just sexual comments. It's like asking me like if I wanted to be with him and Liz.
And did you take those seriously?
No.
And nothing, at least at that point, nothing grew out of them?
No.
Were they the kind of comments that, you know, if you had stepped up and called him on it, they could have been sloughed off as innocent?
Yeah, I did. I didn't necessarily call him on, but I just laughed it off like you're crazy, you're lying. And then I guess he didn't think, like he knew that I wouldn't do that. Like I didn't want to do that stuff, and so he just blew it off.
All right, now, going ahead to December of 2005, well, first of all, in October of 2005, did the Carrolls move from Bennett Road?
Yes.
And where did they move?
To Valleywood.
To Valleywood?
Yes.
Now, is Valleywood here in Claremont County?
Yes.
In the state of Ohio?
Yes.
You having a hard time hearing? All right, move the microphone in a little bit, please. You need to speak up a little bit so these people can hear you.
Yes, sir.
32. It's important that you keep their voice up, because these are the people who are making a decision, and they really need to hear what you have to say.
Okay.
Okay. I want to show you what's been marked State's Exhibit 32, which has been admitted, Your Honor.
Yes.
And I'll ask you, can you identify that?
That's the Valleywood house.
That's the Valleywood home? And that's the home that the Carrolls moved into sometime in October of 2005.
Yes.
And were the Carrolls still providing daycare for your children when they moved to that location?
Yes.
Did they provide daycare for your children very much longer after that?
No.
And you recall when you stopped using them for daycare services?
The end of December of 2005.
Were your kids ever back in that home for babysitting services or to live there? In other words, I'm not talking about a casual visit or a visit between friends. I'm not sure there were any of those, but were your children ever back in that home on Valleywood prior to July of 2006?
No.
Now, moving ahead to January of 2006, you were no longer employing Liz Carroll as a babysitting sitter or providing daycare.
No.
Did you have an opportunity to get together with them in kind of a birthday situation?
Yes.
I want you to tell these people about that.
It was my son and my daughter's birthday, and I had a birthday party at the skating rink for them, and I invited Dave and Liz.
Okay, now would that be the skating rink up in Union Township just off 275?
The Beachmont Roll Arena.
Okay, is that behind that Wrong Tan's Chinese restaurant
Yes.
place? Okay.
Yes.
And you had a party there for two of your children,
Yes.
and you invited Dave and Liz.
Yes.
Have
And
you
their
had much
children.
I'm sorry?
And their children.
And their children. Have you had much contact with Dave and Liz since December when you stopped using the daycare?
No.
Did they come?
Yes.
Was there a discussion at that birthday party about the three of you getting together shortly thereafter?
Is the three of us and my two sisters, Tanya and Jackie.
Okay, who were also, were Tanya and Jackie still using the Carrolls for babysitting services?
Tanya had not been using her yet.
Okay. How about Jackie?
Yes.
Okay. And what was the nature of the discussion?
That we should all come skating without the kids so we could have fun.
And where were you going to do that?
There at Beachmont Roll Arena.
And do you know, was that set up? Was there plans made?
Yes.
And when did that take place?
Shortly after, I don't know the exact date.
Was it sometime in late January or early February of 2006?
Early February.
Early February. And did everyone all agree to go?
Yes.
Who all went?
Me and Tanya and Jackie, Dave and Liz.
Now, at the skating rink, were there actions by the defendant, Liz Carroll, which began to cause you to see her in a different light?
Yes.
And could you explain those?
She grabbed my butt and come up behind me on the skating floor and bounced up against me. It actually made me fall.
Okay, and when she bounced up against you, what part of her body would run into you?
Her boobs and her private area to the back of me.
After Marcus's death, there was a major investigation into Butler County officials and Lifeway for Youth, who had placed Marcus with the Carrolls. Both agencies said they had no idea the Carrolls were unfit foster parents as they appeared suitable. They referred to a glowing reference about the parenting skills from Amy Baker. When screening the couple, Lifeway and Butler County missed that David was bipolar and had gotten 2 other women pregnant. The women were sisters. This occurred when Liz and David were expecting their first child. David alleged that if he wasn't so sexually greedy, none of this would have happened.
Amy and I, we wanted to have sex, got greedy. Amy said, take the kids outside, we'll put Marcus down for a nap. She was supposed to be putting Marcus down for a nap. We found out later on that, my wife and I, when we found Marcus later on, that she wasn't actually putting him down for a nap. She taped him up and in a blanket, and he died.
The investigation also questioned why Marcus's caseworker didn't check on him on that last visit before Marcus's death. After Liz Carroll told him that Marcus was asleep, the worker didn't confirm that Marcus was in the house. But then, by that time, Marcus was already dead. The worker also didn't question why there were other children in the home. It's a caseworker's responsibility to be vigilant and is required to question everything. The worker, however, wasn't charged with any crimes. After Liz and David Carroll were arrested for killing Marcus Fiesel in August 2006, Liz Carroll went to trial. Her husband David accepted a plea deal in return for serving a 16-year life sentence, which means he'll likely be eligible for parole in a few years. Liz Carroll was also offered the same deal, but she rejected it. She decided to take her chances in court. This turned out to be the second worst decision of her life. The first was killing 3-year-old Marcus. On February the 12th, 2007, Liz went to trial. To get an idea of the events that transpired about Marcus's murder, I'll provide statements made by Amy Baker, the prosecutor's star witness. Amy Baker exudes anything but girlish innocence. She had gained a tawdry reputation as tough-talking, hard-drinking, and brazen. A vixen who steals other women's husbands, engages in kinky sexual trysts, and threatens people to get her way. Some say she has been known to pull off a shirt and throw it down like a gauntlet for a fistfight. One spurned wife was so sick of Baker's meddling in her marriage that she asked the judge to keep Baker away from her and her 2 young children. 2 years of trouble with Amy had escalated, and Amy was driving by the Amelia home, throwing things at the windows and kicking her door, the woman said. Amy told police that Liz and David Carroll, the couple she lived and slept with, left their 3-year-old foster son Marcus in a closet to die while they and Amy went to a family reunion in Kentucky for 2 days. The boy was dead when they returned on August 6. Authorities said that Amy was with David Carroll when he burnt the child's body in an abandoned chimney in rural Brown County, Ohio. According to the prosecutors, many people wondered why Amy was not charged as an accessory, but they knew Amy would make the case against the Carrolls. Carroll relatives called it, quote, a deal with the devil, unquote. Liz and David Carroll pointed their fingers right back at Amy. They said Marcus was dead on August the 4th, before they left for the reunion, and that Liz Carroll wasn't home when it happened. David Carroll said Amy bound the boy in blankets and strapping tape and put him in a closet so he and Amy could have sex while his wife was gone. The Carrolls said Amy threatened to hurt their children and their families if they told authorities. "She's devious," David Carroll said. Amy said she told the truth about everything. Quote, "Everybody wants to ruin my credibility so Dave and Liz can walk out of there, walk free and kill me. Is that what people want? The right people know how Marcus died and who is responsible." Unquote. Amy said her relationship with the Carrolls wasn't as twisted as it sounds. She met the Carrolls in 2005 when the Claremont County Department of Job and Family Services referred Liz Carroll to her as a babysitter. According to the state investigation into Marcus's death, Amy lied to help the Carrolls become foster parents by telling officials at Lifeway for Youth that she had known the Carrolls for 5 years and had met them in a bowling league. Her affair with David Carroll began early in 2005 after he separated from his wife. For about 2 months, she and David Carroll lived with his mother, Debbie Hounshell, in Union Township. When David Carroll decided in June to go home to his wife, Amy moved in with them. Amy said she was in love with David Carroll. Quote, "It wasn't some three-way live-in slut thing." Unquote. David Carroll would say otherwise. "She was our live-in girlfriend," he said. Regarding Marcus, Amy said she had never interacted with him. She also said that David Carroll was mean to Marcus. He never had anything to do with him. She had witnessed him abuse Marcus. Some of this abuse included tripping Marcus when he was walking by or putting him in a cold bath. Amy said she didn't see the Carrolls wrap Marcus up before the reunion. She also said she didn't help douse Marcus with gasoline to burn his body. But she did say the Carrolls returned to the fire 3 times. The next day, Amy returned to the chimney. She never looked into the pillowcase that David Carroll had brought back from the chimney. She said they then went to her father's house and put them into garbage bags. Amy tied the bags because David didn't want his prints to be found. His prints were on file from a previous arrest. Amy said she was driving as David threw Marcus's remains into the Ohio River. Amy said David was wearing gloves as he threw the trash bags into the river. He said he couldn't tie the bags with gloves on, so he had her tie them up. She described the morning they discovered Marcus was dead. After returning home from the family reunion on Sunday, David Carroll ran up the steps and went into the house and screamed. He came out and he was pale. He whispered, quote, "Marcus is dead," unquote. Amy said that she and Liz Carroll went into the house and found Marcus's dead body. His feet were chapped and blood had dripped from his nose. His little body was rigid. He was in the fetal position and lying on his side. Amy said that she wanted to call 911, but David Carroll wouldn't let her because rigor mortis had set in, and authorities would know he had been dead for a while. Amy said the Carrolls discussed having Marcus go missing. David Carroll suggested burning the body because they couldn't trace it back to them if there was no body. Amy told David about the abandoned chimney in Brown County. Amy and David Carroll went to Brown County to burn the body while Liz Carroll remained with the children. David Carroll took a blanket, put Marcus's body in a box, and covered him with clothing. Amy said they then stopped by a convenience store to buy 3 gas cans full of gasoline. After getting the gas, they got matches and went to the chimney. Amy said David Carroll took the box out of the car, placed it in the chimney, poured gas onto the box, and set it on fire. Amy then said she went to her father's house and David got a 2x4 to keep the fire going. He went back to the chimney and added more gasoline to the fire. Amy said they then went home and told Liz what they had done. The Carrolls then planned Marcus's disappearance. On August the 10th, Amy said she and David took the older children and got a check from Lifeway for Youth to look after Marcus. Amy said that after Marcus's death, no one slept upstairs. They all slept downstairs. Perhaps it was a guilty conscience. They gave the playpen to friends and bought another one. Amy said the Carrolls then had a yard sale a week before she staged the disappearance of Marcus. She also testified that Liz Carroll didn't want to bring Marcus to the family reunion because he had a bruise on his neck that happened when David left Marcus in a car seat overnight. Her aunt would have been suspicious of the bruise. To keep the children from being suspicious about Marcus's disappearance, Amy said the Carrolls took a teddy bear and placed it in Marcus's bed. Or they would tell the children Marcus was at school or visiting his mother. On August the 15th, the day of Marcus's staged disappearance, Amy said she knew Liz was going to fake passing out at the park. She said David Carroll looked at her and said, "She's doing it now." Amy said she went to her mother's house for the rest of the day and then stayed with her sister, Tina. The police first contacted her on Wednesday, August the 16th, and she wrote out a statement for them. She admitted to lying to the police. She never told them that Marcus was already dead. She didn't see the police again until August the 25th when they visited her mother's home and said they wanted a taped statement. Police would again return on Monday, August the 28th, when she went back before the grand jury. She testified about her affair with David Carroll and how it began. Amy went to Liz Carroll's every day and helped her with the children because he wasn't paying child support. Amy called Liz Carroll and told her about her affair with David. According to Amy, Liz Carroll wasn't upset and even asked her to move into their home. David didn't want to lose Amy, and Amy wanted David to be happy. Amy described what happened on August 4th to August 6th when prosecutors say Marcus died. She didn't want to go to the family reunion. She wanted to stay at the Carrolls' home to move her stuff out and reunite with her husband Brian. Amy said that she and David had cleaned up poo that Marcus had smeared over the room. She said they cleaned the room as best as they could. The Carrolls never talked about taking Marcus to the reunion. Amy said that she had seen Marcus wrapped up like that before, but she never called the police. They'd leave him in the house alone to run errands or attend football practice. Under questioning from the prosecution, Amy said the Carrolls wrapped up their own children and acted like it was some type of game. And she said the last time she saw Marcus was on August the 4th. He was in a high chair, and either one or both of the Carrolls took Marcus upstairs, but her memory was vague. She did recall that she never saw him in the playpen that evening. Liz Carroll went back into the house to get something. She returned to the car and said Marcus was freaking out. Amy said that Liz Carroll held him while David wrapped him up and he slobbered on her shoulder. She said that after leaving the house, the group went to a friend's house in Amelia, then Kroger, then Amy's mother's house, and then they went to Liz Carroll's father's house. On February the 21st, 2007, Liz Carroll was found guilty of all charges. One jury member said that she knew in her heart Liz Carroll was guilty. On February the 22nd, 2007, she was sentenced to 54 years to life. While in prison, Liz tried to blame her issues on the prosecution.
Amy Baker's latest legal move is stirring controversy, but the latest voice of opposition comes from behind bars.
I am appalled by Woody Breyer's affidavits. It would not surprise me if Woody Breyer is lying.
Liz Carroll speaks out from Marysville Prison. News 5 has obtained this exclusive taped statement as Carroll blasts Claremont County prosecutor Woody Breyer in the wake of the latest developments.
Breyer does not have a problem presenting lies or lying himself. Breyer also said that Amy Baker passed the lie detector test and didn't harm Marcus, and I know that's 100% not possible. His affidavits are only a way to try to make his immunity appear justified for his own political career.
Carroll's tape was made yesterday after News 5 broke the story that unfolded in this document, a motions request filed by Amy Baker's attorney saying Mason County prosecutor John Estel agreed not to prosecute Baker in Kentucky. Breyer signed this affidavit spelling out the details. Claremont prosecutors could not be reached, but have said Liz Carroll is a proven liar, despite her claims.
None of the words that came out of Amy Baker's mouth are facts, and it's a shame that Dieters and Breyer claim they are.
David Carroll accepted a plea deal and pled guilty to murder and gross abuse of a corpse. He received 16 years to life in prison. This means that he could potentially be released free one day. Listen to this interview from prison. He doesn't sound like a man who is repentant.
What I really have a problem with is that my wife wasn't even home when any of this occurred, when any of it occurred. And she went on the stand and said that my wife and I taped them up and we went on a family reunion. That's the problem I have, because that's not exactly what happened at all. Exactly what happened is we left them We left him when we went to family reunion, but he was already dead. Amy and I, we wanted to have sex, got greedy. Amy said, take the kids outside, we'll put Marcus down for a nap. She was supposed to be putting Marcus down for a nap. We found out later on that, my wife and I, when we found Marcus later on, that she wasn't actually putting him down for a nap. She taped him up and in a blanket, and he died.
David says several hours passed before he discovered Marcus dead.
So I ran downstairs and I told my wife, I was like, he's dead, he's dead. She was like, who's dead? And she was smiling at me because she didn't know, she thought I was kidding. And then after she seen my face was white, she was like, she started freaking out and crying. I was like, what? She ran upstairs behind me. As soon as she turned the corner, she seen him. And she dropped to her knees and she looked at me and she said, what did you do? Like blaming me. I said, I didn't do this. I said, she did it. Talking to Amy, and Amy was like, I just forgot about him. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. My wife immediately goes to grab the phone. Amy grabs the phone. She's like, no, we can't. She's like, we can't call the cops. We can't call the cops. And Liz's like, I'm calling the ambulance. I'm calling the ambulance. Amy's going, no, he's already dead. It's not going to do any good to call the cops, the ambulance, or anything else, whatever. And Liz is like, we got to. So Amy grabbed the phone from her. Her and Amy got into like a little argument. Amy started pushing her and grabbed the phone out of her hand. And she started saying, you've seen what happened to Marcus. That can happen to your kids too if anything like this gets out.
Although Amy had immunity from Ohio, Kentucky wanted to press charges against her because they had jurisdiction in a section of the Ohio River where she disposed of Marcus with David Carroll. In 2008, Kentucky dropped all charges against Amy. Although she was involved in covering up the murder, she never served any time for her role.
News 5 at 11 starts now.
And we're following two big breaking news stories tonight.
And first up tonight, a surprise ending to a story that has just captivated the tri-state for nearly 2 years now. Charges have been dropped against the woman accused of helping dispose of Marcus Fiesel's remains. Our website, WLWT.com, was first to report the breaking news to you. And News 5's Amy Wagner is live with reaction to the judge's decision today. And boy, Amy, I imagine this has people out there very upset tonight.
Well, Sheree, there is no question about that. And, for many people in this community, this is where it all began, in Julius Park, where David Carroll first reported Marcus Fiesel missing. And tonight, this ending to that tragic story has many people who live around here absolutely outraged.
For me, I'm very upset. I think she should fry for what she did.
Amy Baker won't find any support at Grandma's Pizza in Amelia tonight, even though she used to work here.
I think that's unfair. I think it's not right that our government is doing this to people.
In a 49-page opinion handed down late today, a Mason County judge dropped the charges against Baker for her involvement in disposing of the body of 3-year-old Marcus Fiesel. Ohio prosecutors who struck the original deal with Baker are calling it the right thing to do.
She should have been charged to begin with.
But those who brought the charges against Baker in Kentucky disagree. Mason County Attorney John Estel had this to say, quote, "Indeed, the decision by Judge Nichols and the bulk of the argument in this case forgets the most salient facts, primarily that Amy Baker and David Carroll entered Mason County for one purpose, to avoid prosecution by disposing of the corpse of a murdered child. And the family of Liz and David Carroll, who will spend life in prison for their role in Marcus's death, are also outraged." David Carroll's stepmom says, quote, "We are very, very disappointed. Kentucky dropped the ball, but Amy didn't get off without punishment. Ultimately, she will be judged for her crime." And some who are judging Baker in her hometown tonight say they couldn't be more disappointed.
This is the worst conclusion I could come out with it. This is the wrong way to do it.
Now, I'm told this decision could be appealed. We'll certainly learn more about that in the coming days. As for Amy Baker and what's next for her, a family member tells News 5 she'll begin to concentrate on trying to get her children back. Reporting live in Anderson Township tonight, I'm Amy Wagner, News 5, where the news comes first.
Liz Carroll has been locked up for over a decade. A news channel interviewed her a few years after her arrest. To me, she didn't sound like she was so sorry about Marcus's death, and instead more concerned about Amy wearing her clothes to the trial and blaming everything on Amy.
I'm not like Amy, trying to get out of everything. I'm admitting to what I did do. I just don't want to pay for what I didn't do.
Amy Baker was the star witness for the prosecution, who said Liz and her husband, David Carroll, taped Marcus in a blanket and left him in a hot closet to die. Liz says it was Amy who really taped Marcus, but the jury never heard that because of what happened behind the scenes.
A lot of people wanted to see you testify.
Greg didn't want it.
What was your opinion of that?
I wanted to testify.
Liz deferred to the advice of her attorney, Greg Cohen. Amy Baker's story was essentially unchallenged. Do you blame her for your situation?
Yes and no. I blame myself for my lies, because my lies are what got me in everything. You know, even with her threats, I still had the opportunity to tell the truth several times. But she did go on the stand and lie, and then even had the nerve to smile at me and wear my clothes at my trial. Because she went into my house after I was arrested and took some of my stuff, including my clothes. She wore my clothes at my trial.
A lot of people describe this as Amy Baker, who came there as your living girlfriend. Was she?
She wasn't my girlfriend. I don't know why people keep saying that. She wasn't my living girlfriend. She and Dave had an affair. It wasn't my girlfriend. She was not my living girlfriend.
The two, you never had any kind of relationship like that?
I'm not gonna lie. I did a couple times for my husband. Like, I'm not gonna lie. I did try it. It just disgusted me.
Liz is talking now because she passed a polygraph test with specifics about the murder. She says is proof she is not the killer.
The prosecutors should not be happy at all. The public should not be happy. The public wanted justice. They still haven't got justice.
It's obvious that Liz Carroll was bitter about sitting in prison while Amy is free. There is a saying, no honour among thieves. When multiple people are involved, they'll all turn on each other for the best deal. And that's exactly what Amy Baker did. Although she was involved, her testimony was necessary to secure Liz Carroll's conviction. As for Donna Trevino, the biological mum who terminated her rights to Marcus filed a $5 million lawsuit against county officials, the foster parents, and Lifeway for Youth that placed the boy. Donna Trevino claims the defendants were negligent in failing to adequately supervise the placement and treatment of her son, Marcus Fiesel. In the wake of his death, there have been a lot of changes to the foster care system. Among the many changes put into place, some of these include more follow-up with the foster parents and more continuity between foster kids and their caseworkers. Today, Marcus would be 18 years old. The impact of his death reverberates all these years later. A memorial to Marcus Fiesel was built from the chimney used to burn his body, and a park bench has been dedicated to him. A tree was planted outside Butler County Children's Services building, carrying a marker that bears Marcus Fiesel's name to symbolise and continue the impact Fiesel's memory has had on the agency